Billionaire almost fired his nanny in anger, until he saw her breastfeeding his newborn with love. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Oh, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now, sit back and enjoy every detail. The brownstone on Sutton Place stood like a fortress against the Manhattan skyline, its limestone facade catching the late October sun. Inside, the silence was almost aggressive, the kind that money could buy thick enough to muffle even the sounds of living. Callum Bennett sat in his home office on the 3rd floor, staring at numbers that no longer meant anything. $7 billion in quarterly earnings, 12% growth, a merger closing in Singapore. His fingers moved across the keyboard with mechanical precision, but his mind was somewhere else entirely, or perhaps nowhere at all. That's how he preferred it these days. The crying started at 2:47 a.m. It always started around that time, as if his daughter had an internal clock set to torment. Callum pressed his palms against his eyes, counted to 10 in Mandarin, a trick his therapist had suggested before he'd stopped going to therapy altogether. The wailing continued, high-pitched and relentless, echoing through the ventilation system he'd paid a fortune to install. He'd had 4 nannies in 3 months. The first quit after 2 weeks, saying something about attachment issues and professional boundaries. The second lasted 9 days before claiming a family emergency in Ohio. The third made it to day 12 before she left a resignation letter on the kitchen counter, typed informal as if she were leaving a corporation rather than a household. This one, Holly, Helen, had been here for 6 days. The crying intensified, and Callum felt something dark unfurl in his chest. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. The rational part of his mind, the part that had built an empire from inherited millions, told him to call the agency in the morning, request someone with actual credentials this time. But rationality had left him the same day his wife had, and what remained was only anger. Dressed in expensive suits and living in rooms too large to fill, he moved through the hallway with purpose, his bare feet silent on the Persian runner. The nursery was on the 2nd floor, decorated by an interior designer he'd never met, in shades of cream and sage that his wife had chosen from a hospital bed, 3 days before everything ended. As he approached the door, something shifted in the air. The crying stopped. Callum froze mid-step, his hand already raised to push the door open. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, somehow, weighted with something he couldn't name. He stood there for a long moment, his breath shallow before slowly, carefully easing the door open just enough to see inside. The scene before him rewired something in his brain. The nanny, Hollis, he remembered now, sat in the rocking chair by the window, her figure backlit by the soft glow of the city below. His daughter Isla was nestled against her chest, tiny fists curled in complete surrender to sleep. The baby's face was peaceful in a way Callum had never witnessed, her rosebud mouth slightly open, her breathing deep and even. But it was what Hollis was doing that made him grip the doorframe. She was nursing the baby. The woman's eyes were closed, her head tilted back slightly, and on her face was an expression of such profound tenderness that Callum felt like an intruder witnessing something sacred. A single tear traced down her cheek, catching the light before disappearing into the shadows. The fury that had propelled him here moments ago transformed into something else entirely, something that felt uncomfortably like recognition, like seeing a reflection of his own devastation in another person's carefully controlled grief. Hollis's eyes opened slowly, as if sensing his presence. Their gazes met across the dimly lit nursery, and for a suspended moment, neither moved. She didn't startle, didn't rush to explain. She simply held his daughter with a certainty that made his absence from this room, from this moment, from the past 3 months, suddenly, unbearably clear. "You have no right," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, but sharp enough to cut. Hollis looked down at Isla, then back at him. When she spoke, her voice was steady, gentle, and completely unafraid. "You're absolutely right, Mr. Bennett, I don't. But she was suffering, and She paused, her throat working. I couldn't let her be alone in that. Not again. The words hung between them, weighted with meanings he didn't yet understand. Callum's hands clenched at his sides, every instinct screaming at him to fire her immediately, to restore order to his carefully constructed emotional distance. But something in her eyes, something broken and brave and utterly honest, kept him rooted to the spot. His daughter slept on, oblivious to the silent war being waged over her tiny, perfect head. Have you ever felt torn between protecting yourself and opening your heart to unexpected healing? What would you do if love appeared in the last place you expected to find it? Morning arrived with the kind of gray light that made Manhattan look like a watercolor painting left out in the rain. Hollis stood at the kitchen counter, preparing Isla's bottles with the precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before, even though she'd only been in this house for less than a week. Her hands trembled slightly as she measured the formula. She hadn't slept after Callum had walked away from the nursery last night, hadn't even tried. Instead, she'd sat with Isla until dawn, memorizing the weight of the baby in her arms, the small sounds she made while dreaming, the way her fingers would occasionally flex as if reaching for something in her sleep. She knew what was coming. She'd packed her bag before coming downstairs, left it by the service entrance. No need to make a scene. She'd learned that much in the past 2 months. How to leave quietly, how to disappear without causing trouble, how to carry grief like a stone in her pocket that no one else could see. The coffee maker gurgled, and Hollis poured herself a cup she wouldn't drink. Through the kitchen window, she could see the East River, boats moving like toys across the surface. Her apartment in Queens, the one she'd be returning to today, overlooked a parking lot and a Chinese takeout place that never seemed to close. She'd miss this view. She'd miss a lot of things. You're still here. Callum's voice made her turn. He stood in the doorway, still in the clothes from last night, looking like he hadn't slept either. His hair was disheveled, his jaw shadowed with stubble, and there was something raw in his eyes that made him look younger than his 37 years. I'll be gone within the hour, Hollis said quietly. I've prepared enough bottles for the next 2 days, and I've written down Isla's schedule. She prefers the lavender swaddle at night, and I'm not firing you. The words landed between them like something dropped from a great height. Hollis blinked, her carefully constructed composure wavering. Mr. Bennett, Callum, he interrupted, moving into the kitchen. He poured himself coffee with movements that suggested he didn't usually make his own. And I need to understand what you meant. Last night, when you said not again, Hollis's fingers tightened around her mug. This was worse than being fired. This was being seen. Being asked to excavate the thing she'd buried so carefully beneath professional competence and emotional numbness. It's not relevant to my job performance, she managed. Isn't it? Callum leaned against the counter, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away. My daughter hasn't slept through the night since she was born. The pediatrician says there's nothing medically wrong. 4 nannies have quit. But last night she slept for 6 hours straight in your arms. So tell me how it's not relevant. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sound of traffic on FDR Drive. Hollis could feel the truth rising in her throat, sharp and painful as broken glass. I had a son, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Everett. He was born on August 14th, at 3:22 in the morning. He died 4 hours later. Callum's expression shifted, something behind his eyes cracking open. I'm sorry, he said, and the words sounded like they cost him something. The father left when I told him I was pregnant, Hollis continued, needing to finish now that she'd started. I worked double shifts at the hospital, saved everything I could. I had a name picked out, a crib assembled, tiny socks in the drawer. She laughed, but it came out wrong, hollow. I was a pediatric nurse. I was supposed to know how to keep babies alive. It wasn't your fault. I know that here. Hollis tapped her temple. But here, she pressed her hand to her chest. I don't know anything anymore. I don't know who I am without being his mother. I don't know how to be in that hospital, seeing other people's babies thrive when mine didn't. I don't know how to wake up in the morning without feeling like I'm made of glass. She hadn't meant to say all that. The words had simply poured out, unstoppable as a hemorrhage. Callum was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. My wife, Catherine, she knew something was wrong during the delivery. She kept saying the baby needed to come out, that something wasn't right. The doctors didn't listen fast enough. He stared into his coffee like it held answers. By the time they did an emergency C-section, they could only save one of them. I'm so sorry, Hollis whispered. She made me promise, Callum continued. As they were wheeling her to surgery, she said, promise me you'll love her enough for both of us. And I promised. But when they put Isla in my arms, all I could feel was... He stopped, his jaw working. Anger, Hollis finished for him. Their eyes met, and in that moment, they understood each other completely. 2 people standing in a gleaming kitchen that cost more than most people earned in a year. both drowning in losses they couldn't name and grief they couldn't escape. I can't pay you enough for what you did last night, Callum said finally, but I'm asking you to stay, not as just a nanny, as, he struggled for the word, as someone who understands. Hollis thought about her packed bag, her empty apartment, her empty arms. She thought about Isla's weight against her chest, the way the baby had finally stopped crying. Okay, she said, I'll stay. From the nursery upstairs, Isla began to cry. Not the desperate wailing of before, but a simple announcement. I'm awake. I'm here. I need you. For the first time in 2 months, Hollis moved toward that sound without her heart breaking. And for the first time in 3 months, Callum followed. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt both foreign and strangely natural. Hollis moved through the brownstone like a careful ghost, learning its corners and silences, discovering where the light fell at different times of day. She found that the morning sun pooled in the library around 9 o'clock, perfect for tummy time on the soft rug, that the kitchen faced east, making it warm and bright for afternoon bottles, that the nursery's rocking chair creaked on the third push, a sound that seemed to comfort Isla more than silence. Callum watched from doorways. He didn't mean to lurk, at least that's what he told himself, but he found excuses to pass by whatever room Hollis occupied with his daughter. A forgotten file, a phone call that could be taken anywhere, a sudden need to check the thermostat in the hallway outside the nursery. It had been 4 days since their conversation in the kitchen, and they'd barely spoken beyond practical matters. Isla needs more diapers. The formula delivery is arriving Tuesday. I'll be working late, don't wait up. But something had shifted in the house. The air felt different, less suffocating. Callum found himself sleeping in later, waking to the sound of Hollis singing softly in the nursery, lullabies he didn't recognize, in a voice that seemed to know all about breaking. On Thursday afternoon, he found her in the library, sitting cross-legged on the floor with Isla propped against her bent knees. The baby was making those nonsensical sounds that passed for conversation at 3 months, and Hollis was responding as if every coo contained profound wisdom. She's an excellent conversationalist, Callum said from the doorway. Hollis looked up, startled. Mr. Bennett. Callum, he corrected, stepping into the room. Please, I've heard you call my daughter by name. You can do the same for me. A small smile flickered across Hollis's face. Old habits. At the hospital, we were very formal. You miss it, Callum observed, settling into the leather chair near the window. Working there, Hollis's hands stilled on Isla's stomach. I miss who I was when I worked there. Before, she paused, then seemed to decide on honesty. I miss feeling competent, like I knew what I was doing. You seem competent to me. Do I? Hollis lifted Isla gently, cradling her against her shoulder. Because most days I feel like I'm improvising, making it up as I go. Callum leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Can I tell you something? I haven't held her for more than 5 minutes since we brought her home from the hospital. The confession hung in the air between them. Hollis's expression didn't change, but her eyes softened with understanding rather than judgment. Why? She asked quietly. Because, Callum stopped, swallowed hard. Because every time I look at her, I see Catherine, the same eyes, the same way her mouth moves when she's about to cry, and I'm terrified that if I let myself love her, if I let myself be her father, I'll lose her too. That caring is just another word for waiting to be destroyed. The words came out rougher than he'd intended, scraped raw from some deep place he usually kept locked. He expected Hollis to offer platitudes to tell him he was wrong, that love was worth the risk. Instead, she simply nodded. I understand, she said. After Everett died, I couldn't even walk past the maternity ward. I requested a transfer to geriatrics. Old Mr. Morrison in room 408 used to joke that I was too young to be hanging around people waiting to die. Her laugh was sad, but they felt safer. The elderly. Their deaths made sense. Had order. Weren't supposed to be prevented. Isla made a small sound and Hollis adjusted her position automatically, with the kind of muscle memory that spoke of countless repetitions. Do you want to try? She asked suddenly, looking at Callum, holding her. I mean, panic flashed across his face. I don't think, just for a minute, Hollis said gently. I'll be right here. Before Callum could construct another defense, Hollis was standing, moving toward him with Isla in her arms. The baby was awake, her dark eyes unfocused but aware, tiny hands reaching toward nothing and everything. I'll drop her, Callum said, but he was already positioning his arms the way some distant instinct remembered. You won't. Hollis assured him, carefully transferring the small weight into his hands. Isla felt impossibly light and impossibly heavy at the same time. Callum's heart hammered against his ribs as he cradled his daughter, truly cradled her, for the first time since the hospital. She smelled like powder and milk and something indefinably sweet, and her skin was so soft it seemed impossible that it could exist in the same world as stock markets and hostile takeovers. "Hi," he whispered, his voice breaking on the single syllable. Isla blinked up at him and then, impossibly devastatingly, she smiled. It was probably gas, probably meaningless, but Callum felt something crack open in his chest anyway. "She knows you," Hollis said softly. "Even if you haven't been here, she knows." Callum couldn't speak. He could only stare at this tiny person who was half Catherine, half him, and entirely her own miraculous self. Tears burned behind his eyes, and for once, he didn't fight them. Isla's hand wrapped around his finger, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so small. In that moment, Callum understood what he'd been running from all these months. Not the fear of losing her, but the fear of loving her so completely that losing her would end him. But looking into his daughter's eyes, Catherine's eyes, he realized he'd already lost that battle. He'd loved her from the moment she was born. He'd just been too afraid to admit it. "Thank you," he said to Hollis, his voice rough with emotion. She smiled, and for the first time since she'd arrived, it reached her eyes. "You're doing great." They stayed like that for nearly half an hour, Callum holding Isla, Hollis sitting nearby, all three of them bathed in the afternoon light that turned the library into something holy. Outside, the city rushed on, indifferent and eternal. But in that room, time moved differently, marked only by the steady rhythm of three hearts learning to beat in sync. When Isla finally fell asleep in his arms, Callum didn't want to let her go, but he did, carefully transferring her back to Hollis, who carried her to the nursery for her nap. Alone in the library, Callum sat in the chair and wept quietly. For Catherine, for the months he'd lost, for the father he was afraid of becoming, and for the unexpected grace of a stranger who'd shown him how to hold his daughter without breaking. The following Tuesday brought rain, the kind of persistent drizzle that made Manhattan feel smaller, more intimate. Hollis stood at the living room window with Isla against her shoulder, watching water streak down the glass like tears the city was crying for itself. Behind her, she heard the familiar sound of Callum's footsteps on the stairs. It was 7:15 a.m., earlier than he usually emerged from his home office. She'd learned his patterns over the past week. Coffee at 6:30, conference calls from 7 down to 9, a brief appearance for lunch he rarely ate, then back to his desk until well past midnight. But today, something was different. "I'm taking the day off," Callum announced, his voice carrying an uncertainty that didn't match the declaration. Hollis turned, surprised. He stood in the doorway, still in sweatpants and a worn Columbia University t-shirt, the most casual she'd ever seen him. His hair was uncombed, and there was a vulnerability in his appearance that made him look less like a billionaire and more like any other exhausted parent. "Are you feeling all right?" Hollis asked. "I'm fine, I just..." He paused, running a hand through his hair. "I realized this morning that I haven't left this house in 2 weeks, and Isla hasn't been outside since the pediatrician's appointment last month. The weather isn't great for a baby," Hollis said carefully. "No, but there's this place." Callum pulled out his phone, pulled up a photo. The New York Botanical Garden has an indoor conservatory, tropical plants, controlled climate. Catherine loved it there. She used to say it was like stepping into another world. The mention of his late wife settled between them like a held breath. Hollis looked down at Isla, who was beginning to fuss, her small face scrunching in preparation for a cry. "She's due for a feeding," Hollis said softly. "I know." Callum stepped closer. "I thought maybe I could try, giving her the bottle, I mean." Something warm unfurled in Hollis's chest. "I'd like that." They moved to the nursery where morning light fought through the rain clouds. Callum settled into the rocking chair, Catherine's chair, though no one said it aloud, and Hollis carefully placed Isla in his arms. The baby's fussing intensified, her tiny face reddening. "She's angry," Callum said, panic edging into his voice. "She's hungry," Hollis corrected gently, handing him the bottle. "Here, angle it like this. Yes, just like that." Isla latched onto the bottle immediately, her eyes widening with the single-minded focus only a feeding baby could achieve. Callum's shoulders relaxed incrementally, and a sound escaped him, half laugh, half sob. "I'm doing it," he whispered. "You are," Hollis confirmed, settling onto the ottoman nearby. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Isla drink. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the windows in a rhythm that felt almost musical. When Isla finished, Callum looked up at Hollis with something like pride mixed with terror. Now what? Now you burp her, Hollis demonstrated with her hands. Put her against your shoulder, support her head, gentle pats on the back. Callum followed the instructions with the same focused intensity he probably brought to boardroom negotiations. After a few moments, Isla released a burp that seemed impossibly loud for such a small person. Both adults laughed, a real unguarded sound that seemed to surprise them both. About the botanical garden, Hollis began. I think it's a wonderful idea. You'll come with us? Callum asked quickly, too quickly. I mean, it would be good to have someone who knows what they're doing. Hollis smiled. I'd love to. The Enid A. Haupt Conservatory rose before them like a Victorian fever dream of glass and steel. Inside, the air was thick and warm, heavy with the scent of earth and growing things. Callum pushed the stroller, a top-of-the-line model that had never been used, while Hollis walked beside him, pointing out orchids and bromeliads to a baby too young to understand, but old enough to be fascinated by colors and movement. Catherine proposed to me here, Callum said suddenly, stopping beside a waterfall feature. In the Palm House, actually. I had this whole elaborate plan involving a string quartet and roses, but she beat me to it. Just looked at me one day and said, we should get married, shouldn't we? Hollis studied his profile, the way his jaw worked against emotion. She sounds like she knew what she wanted. She always did. Callum's hand tightened on the stroller handle. When she got pregnant, she was terrified. We'd been trying for 3 years, had accepted it might not happen. Then it did, and she was so scared something would go wrong. He paused. I kept telling her everything would be fine. That worrying wouldn't change anything. But it did go wrong, Hollis said quietly. Yeah. The word was barely audible, and now I can't stop thinking, what if I jinxed it? What if my certainty somehow made the universe prove me wrong? Hollis touched his arm gently. That's not how the universe works, Callum. Tragedy doesn't need a reason. It doesn't require our permission or our pride. It just happens. How do you live with that? He asked, turning to face her fully. The randomness of it all? Hollis looked down at Isla, who had fallen asleep surrounded by the lush greenery, her small chest rising and falling with peaceful breaths. I don't know yet, but I think, she paused, choosing her words carefully, I think maybe we're not meant to make sense of it. We're just meant to keep going anyway, to find moments like this, where the world is beautiful and cruel and impossible, and choose to be present for them. Callum nodded slowly, something shifting in his expression. You're wise for someone so young. I'm 29, not a teenager. Hollis laughed softly. And I'm not wise. I'm just someone who learned that the hard way. They continued walking, the conservatory's paths winding through tropical forests and desert landscapes, each ecosystem perfect and controlled. At one point, Callum reached into the stroller, adjusting Isla's blanket with a tenderness that made Hollis's heart ache. Can I ask you something? He said. About Everett. Hollis tensed slightly but nodded. Do you regret it? Getting pregnant, going through all of it, knowing how it ended? The question was brutal in its honesty. Hollis considered it carefully, watching the play of light through the glass ceiling, the way it dappled across the stone path like scattered promises. No, she said finally, because for 4 hours I was his mother, and nothing, not the grief, not the loss, not the empty nursery can take that away from me. I gave him life, even if I couldn't give him more time, and that matters. Callum's eyes were wet when he looked at her. Catherine would have liked you. I think I would have liked her too. They spent another hour in the conservatory, 3 people navigating grief in a garden of controlled wilderness. When they finally emerged back into the rainy afternoon, something had shifted between them. A wall removed, a door opened. In the car ride home, Isla woke and began to cry. Without hesitation, Callum reached back, letting her grip his finger. The crying didn't stop immediately, but it quieted, becoming less a wail of distress and more a simple statement of discomfort. I've got you, Callum murmured. Daddy's got you. It was the first time he'd called himself that. Hollis pretended not to notice the tears on his cheeks, giving him the privacy to become a father in the back of a town car, on a rainy Tuesday, in the middle of everything and nothing at all. When they arrived home, Callum carried Isla inside, still talking to her softly, pointing out the chandelier, the artwork, the world he was finally ready to share with her. Hollis followed. carrying the diaper bag, and realized with a start that she felt something she hadn't felt in months: hope. November arrived with a bitter cold that made the brownstone's radiators hiss and clang like restless spirits. Hollis had been living in the guest suite for 3 weeks now, and the space had slowly transformed from an impersonal hotel room into something that felt dangerously close to home. A photo of Everett sat on the nightstand, the only one she owned, taken moments after his birth when he'd still been alive and perfect. Some mornings, she could look at it without crying. Some mornings she couldn't. Tonight was one of the hard nights. She stood in the kitchen at 2 a.m. warming milk for Isla's bottle when she heard footsteps on the stairs. Callum appeared in the doorway, wearing pajama pants and a t-shirt that had clearly been slept in, his hair standing in different directions. "I heard movement," he said. "Is she okay?" "Just hungry," Hollis assured him, testing the temperature on her wrist. "Go back to bed. I've got this." But Callum didn't leave. Instead, he moved to the coffee maker, starting a fresh pot even though it was the middle of the night. They'd fallen into this pattern over the past week. Accidental meetings in the dark hours. Conversations that felt safer somehow when the rest of the world was sleeping. "Couldn't sleep anyway," he admitted, leaning against the counter. "There's a merger falling apart in Tokyo. My team keeps calling." "At 2 a.m.? It's 4 p.m. there." He ran a hand through his hair. "I should be on a plane right now. My lawyer says my absence is costing us millions." Hollis looked up from the bottle. "But you're not going." "No," Callum said quietly. "I'm not." The silence that followed was comfortable, broken only by the coffee maker's gurgling and the distant sound of Isla beginning to stir. Hollis moved toward the stairs, but Callum's voice stopped her. "Let me do it," he said. "The feeding, I mean. You've been up 3 times already tonight." Hollis hesitated, then handed him the bottle. "She likes it when you talk to her, even if she can't understand the words." Callum nodded, taking the bottle and heading upstairs. Hollis poured herself coffee she didn't need and settled at the kitchen island, listening to the old house creak and settle around her. 20 minutes later, Callum returned, carefully carrying a sleeping Isla. She fell asleep mid-bottle, he whispered. "I didn't want to put her down yet." Hollis smiled. "You're getting attached." "Terrified is more accurate," Callum admitted, settling into the chair across from her, adjusting Isla's position with practiced ease. "Every time I hold her, I think about all the ways I could fail her, all the ways I already have. You haven't failed her. I abandoned her for 3 months, Hollis. Let strangers raise her because I was too much of a coward to face my own grief." His voice cracked. "What kind of father does that?" Hollis reached across the table, her hand covering his. "The kind who's human. The kind who was drowning in loss and didn't know how to swim. You're here now. That's what matters." Callum's thumb brushed across her knuckles and the simple touch sent electricity up her arm. Their eyes met and something unspoken passed between them. Acknowledgement of a boundary they were approaching. A line neither was sure they should cross. Hollis pulled her hand back, wrapping it around her coffee mug instead. "My mother called yesterday," Callum said abruptly, seeming eager to fill the charged silence. "First time since the funeral. She wants to meet Isla." "That's good, isn't it?" "I don't know." He shifted Isla slightly. "She never approved of Catherine. Said she wasn't from the right kind of family, whatever that means. At the funeral, she spent more time networking than grieving. Sounds complicated. That's one word for it." Callum's laugh was bitter. "Growing up in my family, love was transactional. You earned it by achieving, by being perfect, by never showing weakness. When my father died, my mother cried exactly once, at the funeral, for exactly the right amount of time. Then she went back to running his company until I was old enough to take over." Hollis studied him, seeing past the billionaire exterior to the lonely boy underneath. "Is that why you work so hard? To prove something to her?" "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just trying to fill the silence with noise." He looked down at Isla. "But lately the silence doesn't feel as empty. Having her here, having you here, it's different." The weight of his words settled between them. Hollis knew she should say something professional, should remind them both of appropriate boundaries. Instead, she found herself saying, "It's different for me too." Callum's gaze lifted to hers, intense and searching. "Hollis!" Isla made a small sound and the moment broke. Callum stood carefully, cradling his daughter. "I should put her back down." "Let me," Hollis offered, rising. "You have that call with Tokyo in a few hours." "I'm not taking it," Callum said firmly. "They can handle one deal without me." As Hollis took Isla from him, their hands brushed again, and this time neither pulled away immediately. They stood there in the dim kitchen, the baby sleeping between them, connected by grief and something else, something newer and more fragile. "Good night, Hollis," Callum whispered. "Good night." The next morning, Hollis woke to find Callum had left a note on the kitchen counter. Cancelled the Tokyo trip. Also cancelled Thursday's board meeting. Taking Isla to her 4-month checkup at 2 p.m. "Would you like to come?" Below it, in smaller writing, "Thank you for reminding me what matters." Hollis folded the note carefully, tucked it into her pocket, and went to wake Isla. As she lifted the baby from the crib, she whispered, "Your daddy's learning how to be brave." Isla gurgled in response, her hand wrapping around Hollis's finger. And for the first time since Everett died, Hollis allowed herself to imagine a future that looked different than just surviving, one that might include joy, connection, maybe even love. The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Later that afternoon in the pediatrician's waiting room, Callum sat beside her with Isla in his arms, answering the nurse's questions about feeding schedules and sleep patterns with confidence. At one point, Isla reached for Hollis, and Callum handed her over without hesitation. "You two work well together," the nurse observed with a knowing smile. Hollis and Callum exchanged a glance. Brief, loaded with meaning, neither was ready to name. "We try," Callum said simply, but as Hollis felt the warmth of his presence beside her, Isla content in her arms, she realized they were doing more than trying. They were becoming something she didn't have words for yet, something that felt like family, like healing, like the possibility of happiness after devastation. And that possibility, fragile as it was, felt like the bravest thing she'd ever held on to. Thanksgiving approached like an uninvited guest. The city transformed itself with shop windows displaying cornucopias and pilgrim hats, while the brownstone remained conspicuously undecorated. Hollis noticed but said nothing. She understood that holidays were landmines for the grieving, bright reminders of absences that would never be filled. On Wednesday afternoon, she was folding tiny clothes in the nursery when Callum appeared in the doorway, his phone in hand, and tension carved into every line of his face. "My mother is coming for Thanksgiving dinner," he announced without preamble. Hollis looked up from the onesie she was folding. "That's nice?" "It's a nightmare," Callum corrected, pacing the length of the nursery. "Vivian Bennett doesn't do anything without an agenda. She probably wants to assess Isla, make sure her only grandchild is being raised appropriately. You're her son. She might just want to see you." Callum's laugh was sharp. "You don't know my mother." Hollis set down the laundry, studying him. In the weeks she'd known him, she'd seen Callum vulnerable, grief-stricken, tender, but never quite this agitated. "What are you really worried about?" He stopped pacing, his shoulders dropping slightly. "She's going to judge everything, the way I'm raising Isla. The fact that I haven't gone back to work full-time. You. Me? She'll want to know who you are, what your background is, whether you're suitable to care for her granddaughter." Callum's hands clenched at his sides. "She'll find some way to make it clear you're not good enough, that none of this is good enough." Hollis felt a familiar sting, the same one she'd felt when her ex-boyfriend had told his parents she was just some nurse, when the hospital administrators had looked at her like she was broken after Everett died, when the world kept finding ways to tell her she didn't measure up. "I can make myself scarce," she offered quietly. "Take Thanksgiving off, let you have family time." "No." The word came out forcefully, and Callum crossed the room to her. "I don't want you to hide, I want—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with what he wanted to say. "You're part of this, part of us." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning. Isla chose that moment to wake from her nap with a soft cry, and Hollis moved to the crib automatically, grateful for the interruption. "Besides," Callum added, softer now, "I need you there, as a buffer, as reinforcement, as—" He paused. "As my friend." Hollis lifted Isla, cradling the baby against her shoulder. "Friends," she repeated, testing the word. It felt both too small and too large for whatever was growing between them. "If that's okay," Callum said, and there was a vulnerability in his voice that made her heart ache. "It's more than okay." Thanksgiving Day arrived with crisp sunshine that made the city sparkle like it was trying to compensate for the impending family drama. Hollis woke early, helping the staff Callum had hired prepare a meal that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread. Turkey with heritage breeds, sides made from farmers market vegetables, wine that probably cost more than her monthly rent used to. She'd brought one thing from her own tradition, Her grandmother's apple pie recipe, made with too much cinnamon and a crust that always turned out slightly imperfect. It sat on the counter, humble among the culinary masterpieces, and she found herself oddly nervous about it. Vivian Bennett arrived at precisely 2 p.m., stepping out of a chauffeur-driven Mercedes in a Chanel suit that probably cost more than Hollis made in 6 months. She was 63 but looked 50, her silver hair styled in a perfect bob, her makeup flawless. Everything about her screamed old money and older expectations. "Callum," she said, air-kissing her son's cheeks without actually touching him. "You look thin. Are you eating properly?" "I'm fine, Mother." Callum's voice was tight. "Let me introduce you to Hollis Grace. She's been helping with Isla." Vivian's eyes, the same dark brown as Callum's, swept over Hollis with the precision of a laser scanner. Hollis felt herself being catalogued, assessed, and likely found wanting in the span of 3 seconds. "How lovely," Vivian said, the words carrying no warmth. "And where is my granddaughter?" "Napping," Callum replied. "She should wake soon." "I see. Well, while we wait, perhaps Miss Grace could show me to the powder room." It wasn't a request. Hollis led Vivian down the hallway, hyper-aware of the older woman's presence behind her like a storm cloud about to break. "So," Vivian said once they were alone in the hallway, "how long have you been sleeping with my son?" Hollis froze, turning to face her. "Excuse me?
Push him.
Please. I didn't become successful by being naive." Vivian's smile was sharp as a blade. "The way he looks at you, the way you're clearly more than just staff. I've seen it before. Catherine started as his assistant, you know." "I'm not sleeping with Callum," Hollis said firmly, even as heat crept up her neck. "I'm helping him care for his daughter." "Of course you are, and I'm sure it's all very noble and pure." Vivian's tone made it clear she believed nothing of the sort. "But let me be frank, Miss Grace. My son is vulnerable right now, grieving, not thinking clearly. Whatever you believe is happening between you, it's not real. It's convenience mixed with loneliness." The words landed like slaps. Hollis wanted to argue, to defend herself, but a small voice in her head wondered if Vivian was right. "I care about Isla," Hollis managed. "That's all this is." Vivian studied her for a long moment. "You know what I think? I think you're using my granddaughter to fill the void left by your own child." Hollis's breath caught. "How did you?" "I make it my business to know everything about people in my family's orbit," Vivian said coolly. "Your son Everett, born and died on August 14th. Father unknown or unwilling to claim paternity. Very tragic. Very convenient timing for finding employment in a household with a newborn." Rage and shame warred in Hollis's chest. "You have no right." "I have every right when it comes to protecting my family." Vivian stepped closer, her voice dropping. "You're damaged goods, Miss Grace. My son doesn't need your particular brand of broken trying to attach itself to his life. He needs someone stable, someone from an appropriate background, someone who won't use his daughter as a replacement for the child she couldn't keep alive." The cruelty of it took Hollis's breath away. Before she could respond, footsteps sounded, and Callum appeared at the end of the hall. "Mother? What's going on?" "Nothing at all," Vivian said smoothly, her expression transforming into something benign. "Miss Grace was just showing me around your lovely home." Callum's eyes moved between them, clearly sensing the tension. "Isla's awake. Would you like to meet her?" "Of course, darling." As Vivian swept past them toward the nursery, Callum caught Hollis's arm gently. "Are you okay? You look pale." Hollis forced a smile. "I'm fine. Your mother is formidable. That's one word for it," Callum muttered, but he was already being pulled away by his mother's voice calling for him. Hollis stood in the hallway, Vivian's words echoing in her mind. Damaged goods. Replacement. Couldn't keep alive. She thought of Everett, of those 4 perfect hours, of how she'd held him and promised him the world knowing she couldn't deliver. She thought of Isla, of how completely she'd let herself care for this child who wasn't hers. She thought of Callum, of 2 a.m. conversations and hands that touched too long, of the way her heart had started to unfold toward possibility again. And she wondered if Vivian was right, if she was using them to fill a void that could never really be filled. From the nursery, she heard Isla's delighted gurgle, Callum's soft laughter, and Vivian's sharp voice saying something about proper routines. Hollis straightened her shoulders and headed to the kitchen to check on dinner. She had survived worse than Vivian Bennett's assessment of her worth. She had buried her child and kept breathing. She could survive this too. But as she pulled her grandmother's imperfect pie from the oven, She couldn't help but feel like something precious and fragile had just been crushed in Vivian's perfectly manicured hands. Dinner was a masterclass in civilized torture. Vivian sat at the head of the table. Catherine's place, Hollis realized with a pang, offering backhanded compliments about the food, while finding fault with everything from the wine selection to the way Callum held his fork. "You're gripping it like a savage, darling," she said, her smile never wavering. All that expensive boarding school education wasted. Callum's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Hollis sat across from him, pushing food around her plate, hyper-aware of Vivian's occasional glances in her direction, assessing, judging, cataloging every imperfection. Isla sat in her high chair between them, mercifully oblivious to the tension, gumming a teething ring and making delighted sounds that were the only genuine thing in the room. "So, Miss Grace," Vivian said, turning her attention fully to Hollis. "Callum tells me you were a nurse before this. Pediatrics, wasn't it?" "Yes," Hollis replied carefully. "How noble, and what made you leave such a rewarding profession?" The question was a trap, and they both knew it. Hollis could feel Callum's eyes on her, could sense him preparing to intervene, but she held up a subtle hand. "Personal reasons," she said evenly. "How mysterious." Vivian's smile sharpened. "Though I suppose working in private care must pay better than hospital work, especially for someone with limited options." "Mother," Callum's voice cut across the table like a knife. "That's enough. I'm simply making conversation, darling. Surely Miss Grace can speak for herself." "Actually," Hollis set down her fork, meeting Vivian's gaze directly. "You're right. I do have limited options. I lost my son 2 months before I came here. I couldn't walk into that hospital anymore without seeing his face in every bassinet, hearing his cry in every nursery. So yes, I left. And yes, I took this job because I needed to survive and because caring for Isla helped me remember that life continues even when you think it can't." The silence that followed was absolute. Even Isla seemed to sense the shift, her babbling quieting as she looked between the adults. Vivian's expression flickered. Surprise, perhaps, or maybe something that could have been respect in someone less practiced at hiding emotion. "I see," she said finally. "Well, that's very honest." "Hollis," Callum started, but she shook her head. "It's fine." She stood, her napkin falling to the chair. "If you'll excuse me, I should check on the desserts." She escaped to the kitchen, her hands shaking as she gripped the counter. Through the wall, she could hear Vivian's voice, low and sharp, though she couldn't make out the words. Then Callum's response, equally heated. She was pulling the pies from the warmer when Callum appeared in the doorway, his face flushed with anger. "I'm sorry," he said immediately. "She had no right." "She had every right," Hollis interrupted, surprised by her own calmness. "She's protecting you, protecting Isla. In her own twisted way, she's trying to make sure you're not making decisions based on grief instead of logic. That doesn't excuse cruelty." "No," Hollis agreed, "but it explains it." She arranged the pies on serving plates, her movements automatic. And maybe she's not entirely wrong. Callum crossed the room in 3 strides, taking her hands in his. "Don't let her poison this. Don't let her make you doubt." "Doubt what?" Hollis pulled her hands away gently. "Callum, what is this? What are we doing here?" He stared at her and she could see him struggling with an answer. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence between them. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "But I know it matters. I know that when I wake up at 2 a.m. and hear you singing to Isla, I feel less alone. I know that watching you with her makes me believe I can be the father she deserves. I know that you've become—" "Callum!" Vivian's voice cut through the moment like scissors through thread. "The baby is fussing." They stood there for another heartbeat, the words hanging unfinished between them. Then Callum turned and left, and Hollis was alone with her pies and the weight of things unsaid. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Hollis served dessert, accepted Vivian's pointed silence about her rustic pie, and retreated to the nursery with Isla as soon as it was polite to do so. She was rocking the baby when she heard raised voices from downstairs. Despite herself, she strained to listen. "Not thinking clearly," Vivian's voice carried up the stairs. "That woman has her hooks in you and you're too blind with grief to see it. Hollis is nothing like that. She's genuine, she's kind, she's a replacement, Callum. A substitute for Catherine, a band-aid for your guilt. A ready-made maternal figure for a child you're too afraid to parent yourself. That's not true, isn't it? You haven't touched that business in weeks. Your board is threatening a vote of no confidence. You're hiding in this mausoleum with a dead wife's ghost and a desperate woman who sees your daughter as a second chance at motherhood. Get out. Callum's voice was quiet but lethal. Hollis could imagine his face, the control it must be taking to keep from shouting. I'm trying to help you. I said get out. Now. Hollis heard the click of heels, the slam of a door, then silence. She waited, still rocking Isla, wondering if Callum would come upstairs. When he didn't, she gently placed the sleeping baby in her crib and went to find him. He was in the library, sitting in the dark, staring at nothing. A tumbler of whiskey sat untouched on the table beside him. She's gone, he said without looking up. Hollis settled into the chair across from him. I heard. I'm sorry you had to witness that. Callum, she's not entirely wrong, you know. He finally met her eyes and the pain in them made her chest ache. About me hiding. About using you and Isla as an excuse not to face the rest of my life. That's not what this is. How do you know? He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. How do either of us know what's real and what's just? Grief wearing different clothes. Hollis thought about Everett, about the hours after he died when she'd tried to bargain with God, the universe, anyone who would listen.
No.
About how she'd promised to give anything, be anything if she could just have him back. About how that desperation had nearly destroyed her. We don't, she said softly. We can't know for sure. Not yet. Then what do we do? She stood, moved to his chair and knelt beside him, taking his hands in hers. We keep going. We keep showing up for Isla. We keep being honest with each other. And we give ourselves permission to heal at whatever pace we can manage. Callum's thumb traced circles on her palm, and she felt that familiar electricity, that pull that was becoming harder to deny or define. What if I'm falling for you? He whispered. What if it's real? Hollis's heart stuttered. What if I'm falling for you too? They stared at each other in the darkness, the city lights beyond the window casting shadows across their faces. Then, slowly, carefully, Callum reached up and cupped her cheek. I can't lose anyone else, he said, his voice breaking. If we do this, if we try and it doesn't work, then we'll survive it, Hollis finished. The same way we've survived everything else. He pulled her up into his lap and she went willingly, their foreheads touching, breathing the same air. I'm terrified, he admitted. Me too. From upstairs, Isla began to cry, not distressed, just awake and wanting company. They both smiled, and the moment shifted from intense to tender. I should, Hollis started. Let me, Callum said. I need to hold something good right now. They walked upstairs together, and as Callum lifted his daughter from the crib, Hollis stood in the doorway watching them, father and daughter, learning to love each other, learning to be a family, and maybe, just maybe, learning that there was room for one more person in that family. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like coming home. The week after Thanksgiving felt suspended in amber, beautiful, fragile, and somehow unreal. Callum and Hollis moved around each other with new awareness. Every glance weighted with possibility, every accidental touch electric with meaning. They didn't speak about what had almost happened in the library, but it hummed between them like a song only they could hear. December arrived with the first real snow, transforming Manhattan into something from a holiday card. Hollis stood at the nursery window with Isla, showing her the white-dusted world outside. Look, she whispered, pointing to the flakes drifting past the glass. Snow. Your first snow. Isla's eyes widened, tracking the movement with infant fascination. She reached toward the window, small fingers splaying against the cold glass, and made a sound of pure wonder. She likes it, Callum said from the doorway. Hollis turned to find him watching them with an expression that made her heart skip. He'd been doing that more, appearing in doorways, finding excuses to be in whatever room they occupied, as if drawn by invisible thread. First snow is special, Hollis said, turning back to the window to hide the flush creeping up her neck. Callum moved closer, standing just behind her close enough that she could feel his warmth. Catherine loved the first snow. She said it made the whole city feel new again, like anything was possible. It was the first time in days he'd mentioned his wife without pain shadowing his voice. Hollis glanced at him, surprised. Does it bother you? He asked quietly. When I talk about her? No, Hollis answered honestly. She was part of your life, part of Isla's story. That doesn't disappear just because... She stopped, unsure how to finish. Just because I'm developing feelings for someone else. Callum finished for her, his voice barely above a whisper. Hollis's breath caught. They danced around this for days, acknowledging it without naming it. Now here it was hanging in the air between them like the snow outside, delicate, beautiful, impossible to ignore. Callum, I know it's complicated, he continued, still looking out the window. I know we're both still healing. I know my mother would have a field day, but I can't pretend anymore that you're just Isla's nanny, just someone helping out. You've become... Isla chose that moment to sneeze, a tiny sound that broke the tension and made them both laugh. You have impeccable timing, little one, Callum murmured, reaching to take his daughter. As he did, his hand brushed Hollis's, and neither pulled away. They stood there, hands touching, Isla between them, watching the snowfall. That afternoon, Callum's assistant called. A crisis at the office. Shareholders threatening to revolt. The board demanding his presence. Hollis watched him take the call in his office, saw the way his shoulders tensed, the way his free hand ran through his hair repeatedly. When he emerged an hour later, he looked exhausted. I have to go in, he said, just for a few hours. There's a meeting I can't avoid. We'll be fine, Hollis assured him. Take whatever time you need. He hesitated at the door, turning back. Come with me. What? Both of you. Come to the office. I don't want... He stopped, looking vulnerable. I don't want to be there without you. It was the kind of request that blurred every professional line they'd pretended still existed. Hollis knew she should say no, should maintain some boundary. Instead, she found herself nodding. Okay, we'll come. Bennett Financial occupied 3 floors of a glass tower in Midtown. Hollis had never seen Callum in his professional element, and watching him stride through the lobby in his tailored suit, greeting employees who practically bowed in his presence, she saw a different side of him. Powerful, commanding, completely in control. Mr. Bennett, his assistant appeared, a sleek woman in her 40s who looked at Hollis and Isla with barely concealed curiosity. The board is waiting in conference room A. Thank you, Lydia. Please arrange for my guest to wait in my office. Callum's office occupied a corner of the 42nd floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of the city that took Hollis's breath away. Everything was glass and chrome and expensive leather, a far cry from the warm chaos of the brownstone. I shouldn't be more than an hour, Callum said, setting down his briefcase. There's a sitting area by the window. Isla might like the view. We'll be fine, Hollis repeated, settling into one of the leather chairs with Isla in her lap. Callum lingered, looking at them framed against his city, his empire. You look right here, he said softly, in my space. In my life. Before Hollis could respond, he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him. She spent the next hour exploring the office with Isla, pointing out buildings and boats on the East River. The baby was fascinated by the height, the lights, the bustling world below. Hollis found herself wondering what it would be like to be part of this. Not just the nanny, but something more. To belong in both Callum's worlds. The door opened suddenly, and Hollis turned, expecting Callum. Instead, a man in his 50s entered, silver-haired, expensive suit, eyes sharp with assessment. You must be the nanny, he said, not unkindly. Lawrence Chen, Callum's business partner. Hollis Grace, she introduced herself, instinctively holding Isla closer. Lawrence crossed to them, peering at Isla with genuine warmth. She looks like Catherine. Same eyes. He glanced at Hollis. I'm glad Callum finally found someone good for her. The others were inadequate. I'm just doing my job. Are you? Lawrence's smile was knowing. Because the Callum I've known for 15 years wouldn't bring his employee and his daughter to a hostile board meeting unless they meant considerably more than just a job. Hollis felt heat rise to her cheeks. It's complicated. The best things usually are. Lawrence settled into the chair across from her. Can I tell you something? I've known Callum since business school. I was at his wedding, at his wife's funeral, at every major moment of his life. And I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. You've known me for 5 minutes. I don't need longer. I saw it when he walked through that lobby with you. Like you were the only real thing in a building full of abstractions. Lawrence's expression grew serious. He's been dead inside since Catherine passed, but lately, in meetings, on calls, I've seen glimpses of the man he used to be. That's because of you. You don't know that. I'm a venture capitalist. I make my living reading people, spotting potential where others see risk. He stood, straightening his jacket. What I see in you two is potential. Don't let fear, yours or his, waste it. Before Hollis could respond, the door opened again, and this time it was Callum. He looked tired but triumphant. Lawrence, I thought you'd still be in the meeting. Just came to meet your family, Lawrence said casually, and Hollis saw Callum's reaction, surprise. then something that looked like hope. Lovely woman, beautiful child. You're a lucky man. After Lawrence left, Callum crossed to them, taking Isla from Hollis's arms and pressing a kiss to his daughter's forehead. How was she? Perfect, Hollis said. How was the meeting? Brutal, but productive. He looked at her, still holding Isla. They want me back full time. I told them I'd consider it, but only on my terms. Limited travel, flexible hours. Isla comes first. That's wonderful. I also told them I'd need to hire a proper nanny. He continued, his eyes locked on hers. Because the current arrangement has become complicated. Hollis's heart sank and soared simultaneously. Oh, Hollis. Callum shifted Isla to one arm, using his free hand to cup Hollis's cheek. I don't want to be your employer anymore. I want to be... He paused, searching for words. I want to be someone who can kiss you without worrying about power dynamics or professional ethics. Someone who can ask you to dinner without it being a work discussion. Someone who can tell you I'm falling in love with you without it feeling inappropriate. The world narrowed to his touch. His words, the truth in his eyes. You're in love with me? Hollis whispered. Terrified and completely in love with you, he confirmed. Is that okay? Hollis laughed, tears springing to her eyes. It's more than okay, because I'm terrified and completely in love with you too. They stood there in his glass tower office, 42 floors above the city, with the first snow falling outside and Isla cooing between them. And when Callum leaned in to kiss her, softly, tentatively, like she was something precious, Hollis felt something she hadn't felt in months. She felt found. Love, Hollis discovered, didn't erase grief. It just made room beside it. The week after their confession felt like learning to breathe underwater. Everything was the same and completely different. Callum still worked in his office. Hollis still cared for Isla. But now there were stolen kisses in hallways, hands that lingered too long, smiles that held private meanings. They hadn't told anyone yet. Not officially, but the household staff noticed. The way Callum's hand would rest on Hollis's lower back as he passed. The way she'd touch his shoulder when setting down his coffee. The way they'd disappear into quiet conversations that ended with soft laughter. On Saturday morning, Hollis woke to find a note slipped under her door. Meet me in the library after Isla's 9 a.m. nap. We need to talk. See, the formality of it sent anxiety spiraling through her chest. She spent Isla's morning routine catastrophizing. He'd changed his mind. His mother had gotten to him. He'd realized this was all too complicated. But when she entered the library at 9:30, she found Callum sitting on the floor surrounded by boxes, looking less like a billionaire and more like a lost boy amid wreckage. What is all this? Hollis asked, settling beside him. Catherine's things, he said quietly. I had everything packed up after she died. Couldn't bear to look at it. But I realized, if we're going to move forward, I need to stop running from the past. Hollis's heart swelled. She took his hand, squeezed gently. Do you want help? Please. They worked in silence at first, carefully unwrapping items that told the story of Catherine Bennett. A Yale law degree, a collection of vintage scarves, photos from their wedding, from trips to places Hollis would never see with him. She felt like an intruder, witnessing the ghost of a love story that had ended in tragedy. Here, Callum held up a leather journal, his hands trembling slightly. She started writing to Isla when she found out she was pregnant. I couldn't read it before. You don't have to now if you're not ready. But Callum was already opening it, his eyes scanning the first page. His face crumpled, and Hollis instinctively wrapped her arms around him as he read aloud. My darling girl, you're barely the size of a grape, but already you've changed everything. Your father doesn't know yet how scared I am. He thinks I'm the brave one, the strong one. But I'm terrified of loving you this much. Terrified something will go wrong. Terrified I won't be enough. Callum's voice broke and Hollis held him tighter. She knew, he whispered. She knew she was going to lose everything, and she did it anyway. She chose love even though it terrified her. Just like you're doing now, Hollis said softly. He pulled back to look at her, his eyes wet. I want Isla to have this. When she's older, to know her mother loved her before she even drew breath. She will. You'll make sure of it. They continued unpacking, and Callum began telling stories about Catherine's terrible singing voice, her addiction to true crime podcasts, the way she'd argue Supreme Court cases with him over breakfast. Hollis listened, offering comfort and space, understanding that this wasn't about erasing Catherine, but about making peace with her memory. At the bottom of one box, Hollis found a small velvet pouch. Inside was a delicate gold necklace with a single pearl pendant. Catherine's grandmother gave her that, Callum said. She wore it every day until... He stopped. I'd like you to have it. Hollis's hands stilled. Callum, I can't. This is Isla's. Isla will have plenty of her mother's things. But Catherine believed in love, in second chances, in not wasting the time we're given. He took the necklace from Hollis's hands, moving behind her to fasten it around her neck. She would want someone wearing this who understands how precious and fragile life is. The weight of it settled against Hollis's collarbone like a blessing and a burden. She touched it gently, feeling the smooth pearl. Thank you, she whispered. That afternoon, they took Isla to Central Park. The snow had melted into slush, but the air was crisp and clean. They walked along the paths like any other family, Callum pushing the stroller, Hollis beside him, occasionally leaning into his warmth. I hired the new nanny, Callum said suddenly. She starts Monday, Mrs. Pemberton. 62. Credentials that would impress the Queen, completely professional. That's good, Hollis said, trying to mean it. Which means... Callum stopped walking, turning to face her. You're officially unemployed as of Sunday night. Hollis's stomach dropped. Oh, unless, he continued, his eyes dancing with something that looked like nervous joy. You'd consider a different position. What kind of position? Callum took both her hands. The kind that involved staying in the brownstone. Being with Isla. Being with me. Not as an employee, but as... He paused, vulnerability crossing his features. As my partner. In everything. Callum, I know it's fast. I know people will talk. My mother will probably disinherit me. The board will have opinions, society will judge, but I don't care. I've spent 3 months dead inside and you brought me back to life. You've given me my daughter back, given me hope back. I want to wake up to you every morning. I want to build a life with you. Hollis felt tears streaming down her face. What about Everett? What about the fact that I'm still healing? Then we heal together, Callum said fiercely. Your grief doesn't scare me, Hollis. Neither does mine. We've both loved and lost, and we know how precious this is, how rare. I'm not asking you to forget your son or pretend he didn't exist. I'm asking you to honor him by choosing life, by choosing love. A woman jogged past, giving them a curious look. Somewhere nearby, a street musician played violin. The city moved around them, indifferent to the moment unfolding. Yes, Hollis said finally. Yes to all of it. Callum pulled her close, kissing her deeply, uncaring of who might see. When they broke apart, Isla was making happy sounds from her stroller as if she approved. They walked home through the gathering dusk, past windows lit with warm light, past families and lovers and lonely strangers. At one point, Hollis caught their reflection in a shop window. Man, woman, baby, looking like they'd always belonged together. Maybe they had. That night, after Isla was asleep, they sat in the library where everything had begun.
That was awesome.
Callum pulled out his phone and showed Hollis something he'd been working on. A memorial website for Everett, with space for photos and memories. A digital place to honor the child who'd lived for only 4 hours, but who'd changed everything. I thought, Callum said tentatively, that maybe having somewhere to put your love for him would help. He's part of your story, which means he's part of ours now. Hollis couldn't speak around the lump in her throat. She simply nodded, leaning into Callum's embrace. We're going to be okay, he murmured into her hair. All of us. We're going to build something beautiful from all this broken. And sitting there in the quiet house with the man she loved and the child she'd helped save, Hollis believed him. She believed in second chances, in love after loss, in the possibility that grief and joy could coexist, that you could honor what was lost while embracing what was found. She believed in them. Christmas Eve arrived wrapped in fresh snow and old fears. Mrs. Pemberton had settled into her role seamlessly, giving Hollis and Callum the freedom to simply be together without professional boundaries. But with that freedom came uncertainty. Who were they to each other now? What were they building? And could it survive the weight of their combined grief? The question hung unanswered as they prepared for their first Christmas together. Hollis had insisted on a tree, and Callum had surprised her by cutting one himself upstate, arriving home covered in pine needles and looking more alive than she'd ever seen him. They decorated it together while Isla watched from her playmat, her eyes wide with wonder at the lights. But as evening fell and Mrs. Pemberton left for her own family's celebration, the brownstone felt too quiet, too heavy with expectation. I have something to tell you, Hollis said as they sat by the fire, Isla sleeping between them in her bassinet. Before we go any further, Callum tensed. Okay, the father of my baby. Hollis twisted her hands together. He didn't just leave when I told him I was pregnant. He said I'd trapped him, that I was trying to use a baby to get his money, his status. He came from wealth, you see. Not like yours, but enough. When Everett died, he sent flowers with a card that said, probably for the best. Callum's face darkened with rage, but he remained silent, letting her continue. I've never told anyone that, Hollis whispered. Not even my therapist. Because part of me, the broken, damaged part, wondered if he was right. If Everett's death was some kind of cosmic justice for my supposed sins. For wanting too much. For loving someone who didn't love me back. For believing I deserved happiness. Hollis. And then I came here, she continued, tears streaming freely now. And I let myself love Isla, let myself care for you. And I'm terrified. Terrified that I'm making the same mistake again. Terrified that I'm seeing love where there's only need. Terrified that if I let myself believe in this, in us, everything will be taken away again. Callum moved Isla's bassinet gently aside and pulled Hollis into his arms. She collapsed against him, releasing sobs she'd been holding back for months. For Everett, for her failed relationship, for the fear that she was somehow fundamentally unworthy of love. Listen to me, Callum said fiercely, tilting her face up to his. That man was a coward. Everett's death wasn't punishment, it was tragedy. And you, Hollis Grace, are not damaged or broken or unworthy. You're the bravest person I've ever met. You don't know that. I do. Because you survived losing your child and somehow found the strength to love mine. You walked into a house full of grief and didn't run. You saw a man too afraid to hold his own daughter and helped him find his way back. That's not weakness. That's extraordinary courage. Hollis shook her head. But Callum wasn't finished. I'm scared too, he admitted. Every morning I wake up next to you. I'm terrified this is temporary. That you'll realize you can do better than a widower with more baggage than a 747. That my mother will drive you away. Or my work will consume me. Or I'll somehow fail you the way I failed Catherine. You didn't fail Catherine, didn't I? I couldn't save her. Couldn't give her the happy ending she deserved. I had all this money, all this power, and I couldn't... His voice cracked. I couldn't keep her alive. They held each other. Two broken people trying to convince each other they weren't beyond repair. What if we fail? Hollis whispered. Then we fail together, Callum replied. But what if we don't? What if this, he gestured between them, is exactly what we both need? What if love isn't about being perfect or fearless? What if it's about being terrified and choosing each other anyway? Hollis pulled back to look at him, really look at him. In the firelight, she could see every line of grief on his face, every shadow of loss. But she could also see hope and love and the kind of determination that had built empires. I love you, she said simply. Even though it scares me, even though I don't know how this ends, I love you and Isla, and I want to be here. I want to build something with you, even knowing my mother might never accept you. That society will whisper about how quickly I moved on. That every day might be a battle against our own fears, even knowing all that, Hollis confirmed. Callum reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Hollis's breath caught. I'm not asking you to marry me, he said quickly. Not yet. We're not ready for that. But I wanted you to have this. He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond. It was Catherine's engagement ring. Before I gave her the big one, I proposed with this. I bought it with my first paycheck after business school. Couldn't afford much, but she loved it. Callum, I can't. It's not an engagement ring, he interrupted. It's a promise. A promise that I'm choosing you, that I'm choosing us, that no matter how scared we get, we face it together. Wear it however you want, on any finger, on a chain, in your pocket. But know that my heart comes with it. Hollis took the ring with trembling hands. It was beautiful in its simplicity, warm from being carried close to Callum's heart. Without hesitation, she slipped it onto her right hand. I choose you too, she said. I choose this life, this chance, this terrifying, beautiful possibility. They kissed then, deep and desperate and full of promise. When they broke apart, Isla was stirring, making the small sounds that meant she'd wake soon. I should feed her. Hollis started to stand, but Callum held her hand. Wait. There's something else. He took a breath. I want to adopt a child with you, eventually, not to replace Everett. No one could ever replace him, but to honor him, to build the family we both dreamed of and lost. Hollis's heart stopped. You mean that? Every word. I want more children. I want chaos and noise and a house full of love. I want to give Isla siblings. I want to build something bigger than our grief. When we're ready. When we've healed enough to give a child what they need. When we're sure. Callum smiled. But I needed you to know that I see a future with you, Hollis. A long, complicated, beautiful future. Isla's cry interrupted them, and they both laughed through tears. Callum lifted his daughter, cradling her with the ease of practice, and Hollis stood beside them, one hand on Isla's back, the other touching the ring on her finger. "Merry Christmas, little one," Callum whispered to his daughter. "This is your first Christmas with all of us together, and I promise you, we're going to make sure you know love, even when we're scared, especially when we're scared." Isla gazed up at them with Catherine's dark eyes, and Hollis felt something shift inside her. Not the erasure of grief, but the expansion of her heart, to hold both sorrow and joy. "We're going to be okay," she said, and for the first time, she truly believed it. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering the city in white. Inside, by the fire, three people who'd found each other in the wreckage of loss held on tight, choosing love over fear, hope over despair, and together over alone. And in that moment, that was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. 18 months later, the brownstone on Sutton Place had changed in ways both subtle and profound. The formal living room now held a play kitchen and a mountain of stuffed animals. Family photos covered the walls, some old, some new, all telling stories of love in its many forms. Catherine's portrait still hung in the library, but now it was surrounded by images of Isla's first birthday, Hollis and Callum's small wedding ceremony, and countless moments of ordinary joy. Hollis stood in the nursery, though it wasn't really a nursery anymore. At 18 months, Isla had graduated to a toddler bed shaped like a castle, complete with pink turrets and a canopy of stars. Mrs. Pemberton had long since retired, replaced by a part-time nanny who came 3 days a week, giving Hollis the freedom to return to nursing, pediatric hospice care this time, working with families who understood grief in ways most people never would. "Mama?" Isla's voice called from downstairs, the word still new enough to make Hollis's heart skip. She'd started saying it 3 months ago, and Callum had cried, not from sadness that it wasn't Catherine she was calling for, but from gratitude that Isla had found another mother to love. "Coming, sweetheart," Hollis called back, touching the small photograph on Isla's bookshelf, the only picture of Everett. Isla knew about her angel brother, knew that love sometimes looked like missing someone you'd never get to hold. Downstairs, chaos reigned in the most beautiful way. Callum sat on the floor, his expensive suit abandoned for jeans and a t-shirt, while Isla dumped blocks on his head with gleeful abandon. Through the window, Hollis could see the garden they'd planted together, Catherine's roses alongside Everett's forget-me-nots, growth from grief. "Dada Castle," Isla demanded, her dark curls bouncing as she jumped. "Yes, princess," Callum laughed, beginning to stack blocks with the same focus he once brought to mergers. He looked up, catching Hollis's eye, and the love in his gaze still took her breath away. They'd married 6 months ago in a small ceremony in the botanical garden, where Catherine had proposed, where Callum had first taken Isla, where everything had begun to heal. Vivian hadn't attended, but she'd sent a card, short, formal, but signed "with regards," which was as close to approval as they'd likely get. Lawrence had walked Hollis down the aisle, and Isla had been the flower girl, dropping petals everywhere except where they belonged. "Special delivery." The doorbell rang, and Callum rose to answer it while Hollis scooped up Isla, tickling her until she shrieked with laughter. When Callum returned, he wasn't alone. A social worker stood beside him, and in her arms was a bundle Hollis would recognize anywhere, a newborn, maybe 2 weeks old, with bronze skin and a tuft of black hair. "Hollis," Callum said, his voice thick with emotion, "I'd like you to meet our son." The adoption had been in process for months, but they hadn't known when or if a match would come. Now here he was, a baby boy who needed a home, who needed love, who needed parents who understood that families could be built from broken pieces. Hollis's knees went weak. The social worker crossed to her, gently transferring the baby into her arms. He was so small, so perfect. His tiny face scrunched in sleep. She looked at Callum, tears streaming down her face. His birth mother named him Noah, the social worker said softly. But you're free to... Noah Bennett, Hollis whispered, the name feeling right. Noah Everett Bennett. Callum's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining over their son's small body. Isla peered at her new brother with wide eyes, then gently patted his head. Baby, she announced proudly, as if she'd personally arranged his arrival. The social worker went through paperwork, explained procedures, gave instructions that Hollis barely heard over the thundering of her heart. When she finally left, the four of them were alone, a family pieced together from loss, but held together by love. Are you okay? Callum asked, settling beside her on the couch, Isla climbing into his lap to get a better view of Noah. I'm terrified, Hollis admitted. What if I can't do this? What if losing Everett broke something in me that can't be fixed? Then we'll be terrified together, Callum said, echoing words from a snowy night that felt like a lifetime ago. And we'll love him anyway. We'll love them both anyway. Noah stirred in Hollis's arms, his small mouth opening in a yawn. She marveled at the weight of him, the realness, the impossible gift of getting to try again. Not to replace Everett, nothing could ever do that, but to honor his memory by giving another child the love she'd never stop feeling for her first son. Look, Isla pointed at Noah's tiny hand, which had wrapped around her finger. He likes me. He loves you, Callum corrected, just like we all love each other. They sat there as afternoon faded to evening, the city lights beginning to twinkle beyond the windows. Hollis thought about the woman she'd been 18 months ago. Hollow, broken, convinced she'd never feel whole again. She thought about Callum, unable to hold his own daughter, trapped in grief's paralysis. She thought about Isla, crying endlessly because she could feel the absence of love around her. And she thought about where they were now, messy, imperfect, still healing, but together. A family built not despite their grief, but because of it. Because loss had taught them how precious love was, how fragile, how worth fighting for. I used to think, Hollis said quietly, that loving someone meant risking everything, that opening your heart was just inviting it to be broken. And now? Callum prompted. Now I think closing your heart is the real risk, the real loss. She looked at him, at Isla, at Noah sleeping peacefully in her arms. This is worth it, all of it, the fear, the uncertainty, the possibility of pain. This is worth everything. Callum leaned over, kissing her forehead, careful not to disturb Noah. We should call my mother, tell her about her new grandson. Hollis laughed. She's going to have opinions, probably, but she's been better lately. Sent Isla a birthday present last month. A diamond tiara is not an appropriate gift for a 1-year-old. It's the thought that counts. Callum grinned. Later, after Noah had been fed and changed and settled into the bassinet they'd prepared months ago in hopeful anticipation, after Isla had been read 3 stories and tucked into her castle bed, after the house had quieted into that particular peace that came with sleeping children, Hollis and Callum stood in the library where so much had changed. Catherine's journal for Isla sat on the shelf, alongside a new one Hollis had started for Noah, a record of his arrival, his story, the love that waited for him. On the mantel, 2 small urns held ashes, Catherine's and Everett's, no longer hidden away but present, acknowledged part of the family story. Do you ever wonder, Hollis asked, what would have happened if you'd fired me that night? If you'd walked in and sent me away? Callum pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her waist. I think about it sometimes, how close I came to losing everything because I was too afraid to feel. How one moment of clarity, of seeing you with Isla and recognizing real love, changed the entire trajectory of our lives. It was fate, Hollis murmured. It was choice, Callum corrected gently. Fate brought you to my door, but we chose each other. Every day since, we've chosen love over fear, hope over despair, together over alone. That's not fate, that's us. Hollis turned in his arms, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. It was soft and sweet and full of promise, the kind of kiss that said, I'm here, I'm staying, I'm yours. Thank you, she whispered against his lips. For what? For seeing me that night, for not turning away, for teaching me that hearts can break and heal and break and heal again, and that each time they do, they get stronger, not weaker. Callum rested his forehead against hers. Thank you for saving me, for saving Isla, for building this family with me. for being brave enough to love again. From upstairs, Noah began to cry. Not distressed, just awake and wanting comfort. They both smiled, recognizing the sound that would define their nights for the foreseeable future. I'll go, Hollis offered. We'll go, Callum countered, taking her hand. They climbed the stairs together, two people who'd found each other in darkness and chosen to walk toward light. The brownstone settled around them with familiar creaks and sighs. A house that had witnessed grief and now held joy, that had known loss and found love, that had been a mausoleum and become a home. In Noah's room, Hollis lifted their son while Callum stood beside her, one hand on her back, the other reaching for the bottle warming on the table. Isla appeared in the doorway, trailing her favorite blanket, not wanting to miss anything. "Group hug," she demanded, and somehow they managed it. 4 people tangled together, messy and perfect and real. Outside, the city rushed on, indifferent to the miracles happening in ordinary homes. But inside the brownstone on Sutton Place, a family that shouldn't have existed, built from loss, cemented by love, held together by choice, stood in the soft lamplight and understood what mattered. Not perfection, not the absence of pain, not the guarantee of forever, just this moment, this love, this choice to keep choosing each other day after day, breath after breath, heartbeat after heartbeat. And in a world full of uncertainty, that was more than enough. It was everything. What would you have done if you were in Callum's position that night? Walked away from love because of fear, or taken the risk for a chance at healing? And if you've ever lost someone or something precious, how did you find the courage to open your heart again? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below, letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.